Season 11 came with a lot of changes to many of your favorite and least favorite heroes, and now that the meta has been established, we finally know what the best and worst heroes are right now in this meta. So we're going to be breaking them all down and putting them in a list from S to D tier, so you know exactly what characters you should be locking, or characters that you're going to lock anyways, regardless of what tier they're in. Let's jump right into it. But first, a word from our sponsor. But special thanks to the sponsor of this video, FlexiSpot. I work on my computer, I game on my computer, and yeah, I relax on my computer. Now, even though I get up, exercise, touch a little grass, nothing I do gets rid of my neck and back pain. When you use the computer so much and so long, you're gonna just have pain, and I thought that was just the way it was until FlexiSpot sent me their C7. I bribed my wife a little bit to help me build the chair, and after it was built, this chair has been a dream. Notably, the lumbar support is auto-adjusting. That's gonna adjust depending on how much pressure you're putting on it and how hard you're leaning on it with your lower back. I got lower back pain a lot, and I just don't get it anymore with this chair. Everything on this chair is adjustable, from the chair height to the arm height to the head height. It just goes where you want it to go that fits for you. There are huge 20-inch seats that provide plenty of room, and it can support up to 300 pounds, so it's comfortable no matter who you are. This is also the most comfortable sleeping chair I've ever had. You can lean it all the way back and take a nice, well-earned nap. There's 30-day free return and a 10-year warranty, and it's available in both mesh and foam options. FlexiSpot has an Independence Day sale up to 60% off. Use exclusive code C730 for an extra $30 off. It's the best time to get your favorite chair or desk. Check out their website right now, down below. And once again, special thanks to the sponsor of this video, FlexiSpot. Now, the first character that we definitely got to talk about is Bastion. And Bastion can actually be a bit of a sleeper pick depending on what characters you're up against. I think he's a really good tool to be able to lock in certain situations. Of course, he's going to be really good against characters like Zarya, good against characters like Winston, pretty good against characters like Mauga, and outside of that, he's going to be niche at best. The problem with Bastion is while he has a really high ceiling for damage, you have to get the optimal positions, and you need your team to really support you. So unless you have teammates that are willing to protect you or synergize with you, Bastion is going to be a bit hard to make work consistently. He's still a really powerful character in the right situation, but I don't think that he kind of makes his mark in a meta or anything like that, and this being a meta tier list, as such, he's going to be in the C tier. Still playable, just a little bit niche in his application. Now, next up, we do got to talk about Cassidy. And a really interesting thing happened to Cassidy. So he did get a technical health decrease with the survivability of him when he rolls being a little bit less effective. And his magnetic grenade got changed. And the thing about it is, it's almost a worse ability than it was before, or it is a worse ability, but it's far more consistent. And you would be surprised how much consistency matters with a character like this. You need your abilities to be reliable. You need to be able to guarantee a certain value from an ability, and it's stabilized Cassidy in a way that I think was really important for his character. Add to that the fact that there are characters like Hanzo and Sojourn struggling now due to changes that have happened to them recently or in the past, and now Cassidy is kind of cementing himself as a pretty good neutral threat that just has a lot of damage in that neutral game, in that primary fire, able to deal with threats, able to deal with divers, able to pump out a ton of damage. And as such, I'm actually putting him in the A tier, pretty surprisingly high, but I think he's that good right now. He's really strong. Next character on this list is D.Va, and D.Va is still really freaking strong. This character is phenomenal, and there's a lot of reasons for it. She really can just do it all, right? You can contest the high grounds, you can take off angles, you can shut down DPS. You're really good against flying characters like Pharah, which we'll talk about a bit later, that are really strong right now. She's just generally has no bad matchups because you can force the fights that you want to take. You can avoid enemies that you don't want to fight, like a Zarya fully charged. Yeah, you don't want to fight her, but you can avoid her. You can play high ground positions. You can force her to drop to the low ground and take the high ground. There's just so much you could do on this character. She is hard to play, I will say that. Like, it's not like this character's gonna play for you, and there's always better decisions you could make. So if you're locking her in your games and you feel like you're not getting a lot of value, I would highly suggest going back into your replays and watching through and seeing if there's any moment where you lost your mech where you shouldn't have. That's really important. But yeah, I'm gonna put her in the S tier. I think she's that strong right now, and definitely a character that I would highly suggest learning. Putting the time into and learning is worth your time. The next character that we got to talk about is Genji, and Genji is pretty weak right now. Unfortunately, when you compare him to a lot of the characters that are similar to him, he lags a bit behind. I think he's like a solid threat all around, depending on the composition you're playing in. He's good with a dive. He can be played with a brawl. And if you're better than the people in your lobby, you can get value with him. But overall, he's going to be a bit weaker than many of the other dive options. And I'm actually going to put him at the very top of C tier because I think there's just too many other options that you would rather play other than Genji. Even if you're really great at Genji, yeah, he's probably going to be like a B tier or low A, potentially, depending on your rank. But for the meta, he's really weak, and I think he really has an overinflated pick rate, primarily due to the fact that people just like Genji. And I like him too. I'm gonna lock him regardless of how good he is, but he's not very good right now, especially when you compare him against characters like Sombra and Tracer and Echo and Pharah. But we'll get to that in a little bit. Hanzo. Unfortunately, this is probably the worst state that Hanzo has been in a very long freaking time. He's just not a very effective character. He's worse than pretty much every other alternative. He doesn't have an identity as a DPS. There's no point in playing him comparatively. He's like worse at spamming than Pharah. He's way worse at sniping than Widowmaker. He's way worse at the mid-range than Ashe, and he doesn't do any of these things extremely well. He can't one-shot anymore. Like, this character is the character that I think this is probably one of the weakest times we've ever seen him, and I'm putting him in the D tier. He's that bad right now. And the next character that we have for you on the list is actually Junkrat. And Junkrat is a niche character basically built into his design, but will always have a place on specific maps, specific choke points, and in the hands of true specialists. This is a character that people have climbed to the highest ranks to play with, and is definitely capable of having a ton of impact if you know how to play him and get value with him, if you really have mastered the character. But for most people, he's really only going to be good in certain situations where you can maximize the fact that he really makes it painful to cross through space, right? You can play him on Eichenwald first defense. You can play him on Hollywood first defense. Like, there's a lot of these maps where people are naturally routing through certain choke points, and Junkrat is just going to be able to fill that with damage that your other DPS and your other team is going to be able to follow up on. That being said, Junkrat still niches out his identity as a character that I think once you're really good at, you can make him work, and he is a character that can attack the meta in a way that other characters simply cannot. I'm actually going to put him in the C tier just because of his niche pick rate, but like I said, if you really like this character, you really want to grind with this character, by all means, lock him in your games. You'll be just fine. Next up on the list, we have Lucio. Lucio is still fantastic. He's played in Dive. He's played in Brawl. There's a lot of compositions that he's just really good in, and he's played a lot. Unfortunately, the biggest mark against him is poke, right? If you're playing any poke composition, if you're playing any Sigma-based composition, you don't really need a Lucio to enable that, and there's other characters that can get easier value. And really, it's hard for me to justify putting him in the highest tier, mainly because there are so many great options to pick from in the support category. I think there's just so many competitive options that it's really hard to lock in and pick just one. So as such, I'm going to put him in the A tier, although I'm going to put him in the really high A tier because he's still really solid at enabling two of the most popular compositions. Next up on the list is Mei. Mei did receive a slight buffing here, although it was paired with nerfs as well. So overall, it is a net negative unless you're really good at Mei accuracy-wise, because they made her icicles a little bit harder to hit. Still, it helps her confirm targets a little bit easier, and Mei has always been a character that can be good in the right situations. It's just been really hard to justify her in a world where mobility is king. And I think that even though there are going to be certain maps and compositions that she's going to do well against, especially ones that aren't centered around rapid mobility, overall, she's a little bit lacking in the meta. And as such, I'm going to put her at the bottom, towards the bottom in C tier. Still definitely playable, and in the right hands you can get value with, but not the easiest way to get value, and respectively deserves a C tier spot. Next off is Mercy, and overall, Mercy is struggling quite a bit. I think Mercy is rather weak in this season compared to many of the seasons in the past. You're not really going to get that much value out of pocketing, except for maybe Pharah, and I don't even think that that's necessarily the best route to go. She can get value in some situations, but when we talk about very highly mobile compositions, we talk about everyone moving, everyone diving, everyone dealing damage, Mercies are going to get chased around the map. They're going to get hunted by Tracers and Moiras and tanks, and it's going to be really hard to be able to live on Mercy, not being able to defend yourself. And add to that the fact that Mercy doesn't really provide enough in, a meta where damage boosting a hit scan or damage boosting a flyer isn't really getting enough value to justify its cost. In fact, it makes you more vulnerable to dives in a lot of cases and more vulnerable to mobility. So yeah, I'm putting her in the C tier. It's unfortunate for Mercy mains, but this is kind of where she is right now. I still think you can get value on Mercy if you're pocketing like a really, really great player, but on average, Mercy is going to be pretty hard for you to be sustainable and stay alive. Next off, we have Pharah, and Pharah is a character that I feel like people have been sleeping on for a long time. Yes, the armor changes did help her, and this was like a patch ago that helped her quite a bit. But even before that, Pharah, it was just one of the best spammers, really, really good at diving, really good when people created space for you, really good in the neutral. Like, there was a lot to love about this character, and it took a while for people to really start to learn this character and wake up to this character. This character's fantastic. Really, really strong. Doesn't have a lot of very good counters, to be honest. I think the hardest character to deal with is really Echo, but Echo's a little bit worse than the neutral, so it's turned into a situation where Pharahs are seeing more play. And yeah, this character is really, really powerful, really strong. I have a Pharah guide on this channel you can definitely check out if you want to learn how to master Pharah. But yeah, I'm putting Pharah definitely in the A tier. That's how strong she is right now. She's really, really powerful. Next off is Reaper, and this placement might surprise you a little bit. Reaper's actually not terrible as he has been in the past, right? He's pretty good against Ramattra. He always has been. He's actually good against Winston, generally, of course. He's good against a lot of the other tanks characters like Zarya. He plays well with Zarya. He plays well with Junkrat Queen. He's okay against characters like Roadhog. It's hard for Roadhogs to kill him very consistently. Of course, you can't play him on any of the poke maps, but he's actually pretty decent against Mauga. So there's a lot of these character matchups that he's pretty decent against and be decent with. And it all kind of comes together where he's a pretty solid target that's hard to die. He has decent mobility. Like, there's a lot to like about him, and in a world where there's less poking and more brawling or diving, he is doing okay. I'm not going to say he's doing great, but I'm going to put him in the B tier. I think he deserves that spot, and yeah, it's pretty reasonable. Now, Ryan did get a slight pseudo buff in the fact that now Suzu can't bring up his shadows, which is nice, but really this character is still not great. Like, he's not good enough to justify him over many of the other tanks. He's just lagging behind many of the other characters in the game, and it's so severe to the point where if you're playing this character, I think you're literally putting yourself at a huge disadvantage against most of the characters in the game. He's really that weak overall. Like, yes, you can get value with him, of course, but if you look at every single other tank in the entire game, Ryan is definitely the weakest tank, and I'm actually going to put him in the D tier. Maybe he deserves a C tier, but yeah, I just can't see the argument to play him over many of the other tanks in the game. So respectively, I'm putting him here. Now we do gotta talk about Roadhog. Roadhog is actually really strong. I'm putting him in the A tier. He's still really hard to kill. He's hard to counter. There's not really a solid way to deal with him, and he feels unkillable at times. He feels almost oppressive at times. He can stall an objective for super, super long. He can kill you if you make a mistake into him. He's really strong, really hard to kill, frustrating to deal with, and even characters that in the past have countered him, characters like Ana, just don't counter him to the same amount anymore. So yeah, he's an A tier pick. He's definitely a threat and definitely a character that you can climb with if you get good enough with him. Next up, we do got to talk about Soldier 76. I'm actually going to put him in the A tier as well. Just consistent damage output, decent mobility, flexible with the compositions you could play him with. Like, I don't think he's always going to be the most optimal, but he always is going to be solid. He's always going to be good. And I like the fact that he has good mobility. I think he deserves the A tier pick. You could argue B is a little bit better for him overall. But yeah, I think he's actually pretty powerful. I'm going to put him in that A tier. Next up is Sim. Sim's a little bit of a tricky one to place, but what it looks like from the outside looking in, especially with a lot of the specialists playing her, is that she's pretty good. She has good mobility. You can play a sort of dive space creation style where you're being aggressive with your teleports. You can play a slower style that focuses around stalling out a choke and playing on the front line. There's a lot of flexibility with this character, and I think that they've gotten her to a point where she's just powerful enough. Like, she's pretty good in the right hands, not gonna get you, free wins or anything like that, but she's like Junkrat in the fact that once you get good with her, you can get a lot of value with her, but she's more flexible than Junkrat by far, and because of that, I'm gonna put her in the B tier. I think she's a really good character right now, especially if you're really good with her. Next up is Torb. I'm actually going to put Torb in the B tier. If you're not going to be playing mobility, Torb is one of the best things that you could be doing because he's just really good at standing there and outputting a ton of damage, outputting a ton of pressure, keeping the flankers in check. So if you're playing a no Lucio, really dirtily comp where you need to protect your team, you're playing a Zen Ana or something along those lines, Torb can be that thing that just holds the fort down, outputs pressure, outputs damage, really applies pressure to everyone within his line of sight. I think he's a pretty good character overall, but it depends on your composition. Of course, you could get left behind on Torb, and you could be targeted on Torb if you're left alone. So, you know, if you're playing a hypermobile Lucio, Kiriko comp, then I wouldn't suggest Torb for sure, so it depends on what you're playing. Next up is Tracer, and I'm going to put Tracer in the D tier. Just kidding, I'm putting her in the S tier. Tracer's still so strong, so freaking strong. There could be an argument that Tracer deserves a little bit of lower placement, but when we talk about an objective meta, Tracer is the most flexible character imaginable. Yes, you need a certain skill requirement to get the full value, but even without that skill requirement, Tracer's still good, and Tracer gets better and better the higher in rank you go. And the thing about Tracer is, whether you're playing a poke, whether you're playing a brawl, whether you're playing a dive, whether you're playing ranked randomness, Tracer's great. You trade better for resources, you can execute low HP targets, you have great mobility. Oftentimes you can trade up in your value and you're going to have so much uptime overall. Just a really phenomenal character and definitely deserving of that S tier. Widowmaker, a character that I have talked a lot about, and the more I look at this list, the more I want to kind of put her here. Now, I understand that Widowmaker doesn't have great mobility. I mean, your grapple is pretty good, but she operates on a different axis than a lot of the characters. She applies a ton of pressure. On the sniper map, she's pretty much necessary, especially if there's a good sniper on the enemy team. She's super, super important. And on many maps, she can just get a crazy amount of value and take over a game. We're really seeing her thrive a lot right now, and I think she deserves a high placement, so I'm going to be putting her in the A tier respectively. Next up is Winston, and I'm going to put Winston in the high B tier. He is a good character. The only problem with Winston is I think that there are some other characters that could be a little bit of a better alternative to him at times. He is good at creating space for divers, but he is a little bit one-dimensional and linear in the fact that I think he's better with like a coordination and everyone being on the exact same page. You're not going to get that as much in ranked, in a pro play, sure, but not in ranked play. So I think he's really good. He does, you know, apply pressure in a lot of different ways, but when we compare him to characters like D.Va who are more flexible and other characters on this list, I think he lags a little bit behind. I'm putting him in the B tier respectively. Still a great character though. Next up is Zarya. Zarya I'm also going to be putting around this tier. I think I'm going to put Zarya like right around here. Super solid character, not playable on every map. You can't play her on the sniper maps. You can't play her on the flashpoint mobility heavy maps, but on some maps like King's Row and other maps like that, closer range maps, you can definitely play her, get a lot of value with her. I think she's one of the best characters if you're lower than the plat rank and you want to climb. Zarya could be one of the best tanks that puts a lot of agency into your hands. Super strong, super effective, definitely deserving of a B tier placement. Really great character overall. Next up is Zen. And Zen is tricky to place because I actually think he's pretty strong. I want to put him in the low of A tier, but it's a little bit hard to place him perfectly. He is a feast or famine type character, right? Like if you can live on Zen, if you can position well or you have someone to support you, then yeah, you can get a lot of value, but he's equally as vulnerable, able to get dove and targeted and isolated. So it kind of depends on the situation. It depends on your skill. It depends on, are your team aware of you? There's a lot of factors that go into whether or not a Zen is going to pop off, but he has the capability to pop off, and he should be someone that is established in the meta. So I'm going to put him up here in A tier. I think he's really solid, really strong, but yeah, there are definitely vulnerabilities to the character. Similarly, Ana has vulnerabilities. B tier, top of B tier. I think she has a lot of the same vulnerabilities that Zen does, but not as big of an upside if she lives. I mean, yes, don't get me wrong, there's a great upside with Ana, but Discord is just crazy powerful, crazy broken. So Ana has upside, not quite as much as Zen. Now, granted, if we were just doing this tier list based on what is picked the most, Ana would be all the way up in S because people pick Ana the most. But we talked about this with Genji. There are characters that are picked more just because of how people like to play them, right? People love playing Ana. People love playing Genji. That doesn't mean these characters are objectively more powerful than everything else, but it does mean that people like them enough, they like their playstyle enough, that they're willing to like these characters in spite of that. Don't feel bad if that's you, because that's definitely me, but it's something that you should consider. Next up is Sombra. Sombra is basically just like the character you would rather play than Genji. She's really good at countering a lot of characters, put a lot of pressure on Zens, put a lot of pressure on Anas, put a lot of pressure on Widows, really good against a lot of divers, good against divas, decent against Pharahs to an extent. You can sneak up on them. There's a lot to love about this character. I'm going to put her right here. Really, really solid diver. Definitely a fantastic character with a fantastic ultimate. Yeah, there's not that much to say about Sombra other than she's just really, really great. I think that a lot of the options, the dive options, are just going to be worse than Tracer, but you're kind of fighting for second best, and Sombra definitely makes a really compelling case to be second best. Orisa is next, and yeah, I mean, this character is still really strong, really hard to kill, just like kind of this unkillable monstrosity. I'm going to put her here, I think. It's kind of hard to place her, but still an unkillable monstrosity, still has great CC, can exist, stand there, gets to really live the tank vision, the tank dream of being this unkillable object. Yeah, definitely gonna put her here in the A tier. Solid character overall, but yeah, definitely frustrating. I'm biased against Orisa. Sorry, you Orisa mains, but I don't think this character should ever be meta. That's just my opinion. But the fact of the matter is, she's strong, and she's here to stay. Now, Doomfist is a character that I'm actually gonna put like here. There are some pros and cons of this character. He is a really fast-paced diver that has the capability of pivoting on a dime, right? You can go from 0 to 100. So if you're going and being proactive, you have characters that will take advantage of you, baiting out Suzus, baiting out sleeps, baiting out abilities. You can get a lot of value on this character. But if you have to play the brawl version of Doom, the cycle in, cycle out version of Doom, you're worse at holding space than many other tanks. You're worse at holding space than Zarya, Orisa, Roadhog, Sigma even, Junker Queen, Ramattra. Like, you're not great at holding space. You're great at instantly fighting for space or fighting for kills, fighting for a team fight. And so you need the right composition for that. I don't necessarily think that Doomfist is going to be good all the time, even if he has the capability of completely taking over a game, of course, in the right hands. But most of the time, you need the right resources, because the cycles of Doom can be counteracted by the cycles of cooldowns, right? If the enemy team don't have to use a lot of their cooldowns, they don't have to use their sleeps, they don't have to use their Sudus, and then every time you engage, they use these things, and then you have to back off. You either have to like wait a really long time to get your ultimate back and then go for like a really big play, or you need your team to follow up and find value. And if you're only popping up every ultimate fight with Doom, it's almost not enough to carry a lot of these games. So yeah, respectively, I'm gonna put him in the B tier. I think he still has carry potential, but he's definitely a much harder to get value with than many of the other tanks above him. And yeah, I think he's fine, but it depends on the situation. Moira is a support that's just kind of crazy. I'm actually putting her all the way up in the A tier. Great mobility, great lethality, really just hard generally to like interact with or deal with. I know that you can like punish her if she has, you know, pretty poor movement, but a good Moira is going to be able to move and dodge really, really well. They're going to be able to take duels. They're going to be able to add a lot of pressure to the team fight, and they're just hard to punish. Like, they're going to have really low deaths, a lot of uptime. Really, how the game has kind of moved, Moira has become better and better and found a pretty established place in the meta. I definitely think that she's deserving of A tier, maybe even higher. You could make the argument. But next up is Brig. I'm actually going to put Brig in the B tier. Great protector character, great character to protect and pair with characters like Cassidy, characters like Ana. Can't really pair her with Zen all that often unless you have a really specific composition because of the low amount of heals overall. But great protector character, really powerful character. It's just right now mobility is kind of king. Yes, you can dash and pop that ultimate and bash and do all this like movement tech stuff, but overall mobility is really where you want to be most of the time, or mass survivability, which she does have. So as like an alternative to the fast mobility aspects, there are, you know, compositions that center around Brig. But when we look at like characters like Pharah that are taking over a lot of lobbies right now, Brig can do nothing to interact with that. You're oftentimes going to get feasted on by that, so it can be pretty frustrating to play her depending on the skill level of your opposition. But she could still be good in the right comps. You just got to set them up and play them. Next up is Ball, and Ball is lacking quite a bit. He's too easy to counter. There are a lot of characters that just can shut him down completely, characters that don't care about him all that much. And yeah, his rework identity, it's not really that great. I think you could get value on him, sure, but he's not that much different than many of the other dive taking oppositions. And yeah, there's just too many characters that, you know, Orisa chance seeing him, he's getting hooked, he's getting freaking stunned by Cassidy, he's getting hacked. I mean, come on, there's just so much. Maybe it even deserves a C tier. You can make the argument. I know that people can be really good with him, but most people are not gonna be. It's just a rough time. It's just a rough time for this character. Ashe is a tricky one. I think you could argue that Ashe deserves an S tier spot, and I'm gonna put her here just because I want to. No, I'm just kidding. I think I probably put her here. So it's close about whether or not I think she's better than Cassidy. Yes, she outranges him, but what we're seeing right now more is just you want mobility or a way to survive mobility, and Cassidy's a bit tankier. It's a bit tankier than Ashe. Yes, Ashe has a little bit better mobility, and her ultimate is like loads better, so I don't think she's that far behind, but it kind of depends on the situation and your skill sets, right? She's still a really, really great pick. I think either of those characters would be fantastic for you hit scan players, and for the first time in a long time for the DPS role, I think that there's a good amount of projectile and hit scan DPS that you could pick from. Projectile, hit scan, flex. There's a kind of representation at the high ends of play for all those types. So depending on whether you want to lock Echo Pharah, whether you want to lock Tracer only, whether you want to lock freaking Cassidy Ashe, Widowmaker, like the choice is yours. You got a lot of options right now as a DPS player. Baptiste. Baptiste is great. He's always been great. He still is great. Yeah, I mean, just once again, he's not going to play fantastic until like a lot of these mobility-heavy compositions. But that's okay. He doesn't need to, right? He's super survivable. He's going to be great in ranked. He's going to be great with characters like Orisa, Cassidy, Hog, Zarya. But yeah, he's going to lag a little bit behind like these hyper-mobile compositions. He doesn't have any horizontal mobility, so he's going to lag behind those a little bit. But he doesn't need to be seen playing every composition. He's still really good. He's still really strong. And I think he's A tier worthy. Speaking A tier worthy, we do have to talk about Sigma. Sigma is great. I mean, he's needed on all the sniper maps like 100%. Whether it's Circuit Royale, whether it's Havana, whether it's Junkertown, he's needed. He's great. He's fantastic. I can't emphasize enough how much if you're a tank player, you need to know Sigma. You need to know how to flex a Sigma. He's just that good. If you don't flex him, you're going to have a much harder time. He's a good character to play, and he's just so needed that he warps the meta around him. As such, he's in the S tier. Echo. I think Echo's a little bit worse right now than Pharah, even though, ironically, Echo's one of the best matchups against Pharah. Really, really good at hunting down Pharahs and punishing Pharahs. But yeah, Echo just fights the meta at a little bit of a different pace. I'm going to put Echo in the A tier. Still really, really solid and really strong. There are a lot of really powerful characters that can keep you in check right now. You know, characters like Cassidy that could be kind of a nightmare. But even still, a great Echo can still get a lot of value. This character's still really, really strong. And a great character to know in addition to Pharah if you're a projectile player for sure. Now, next up is Sojourn. And Sojourn is not dead by any means. Definitely still a reasonable player. And I know I'm kind of filling up this A tier a lot, but I think that's just a lot of reasonable options, right? Just a lot of really reasonable options. I'm putting Sojourn at the bottom of A tier. Now, I think that she's nowhere near as good as she was before, which means that makes it so that there's other characters that kind of compete with her a bit more. The pick rate is more contested, but still a solid pick overall. Still has a really strong kit, and even outside of like the crazy burst that you could do before, still has high burst, still has good dueling capability, still has a high carry capability. I think it's still an A tier character, and with so many tanks to just shoot at in the neutral, whether it's Orisa, Mauga, or Hog, having such a high uptime on that right click means that this character is still pretty strong. Junker Queen, still good as well. I'm actually putting Junker Queen in the A tier as well. Still a really fantastic character. Really good with the Lucio Kiriko compositions. Really good as like a pseudo dive where you're using shout to enable a dive. Just a solid all-around character. I think the cool thing about Junker Queen is you get the power of a dive while at the same time being a really good character that can just hold space. You know, unlike some other tanks, dive tanks that are just bad at just standing there and holding space, Junker Queen can dive, quote unquote, with her team by shouting in and going in aggressively, but can also just stand there and occupy that mid space, fish for potential knife pulls and things like that. So yeah, pretty powerful. Now, Kiriko. Now, I know that I made Kiriko one of my big losers, and I still think that it's important to understand that she is a loser compared to her old self, because her old self was like undisputed S tier, so strong, and the character is still really, really strong. But once again, I need to make this clear that for most ranks, I'm talking about like even masters and below, Kiriko does not have a great win rate. And the reason is this character is not going to get more value than her opposition until you get good enough and make the right decisions enough of the time. And that's not easy to do. It's not easy for anyone to do. And this doesn't mean this character is bad or anything like that, but it does mean that this character is still a loser, still weaker than she is perceived a lot of times. I think people go up against Kiriko's and like, oh, these abilities are so broken, but they don't realize that Kiriko, like on paper, isn't winning these games. Like they're doing a lot that you might think is broken, but they're not necessarily winning all these games. Still though, this character is kind of essential for one of the best compositions that are seeing play right now. Just a highly mobile Lucio, Kiriko composition. Still strong, still powerful. So as such, I'm still putting Kiriko about here. Still really strong, still really solid. Maybe you could make the argument that she actually deserves to be a little bit above Moira. Maybe I'll put her right there. Still really strong character, but definitely, you know, you're feeling some of those nerfs that have been adding up over time, especially if you've been playing her for quite some time. She's going to be a character that you're going to constantly need to really push the limits of and constantly need to get better and better of, or else you're going to fall behind the value that you're getting previously. Like, if you weren't getting enough value to carry before, the more nerfs that come through, the more and more you're going to have to do to get the same value. Ramattra, unfortunately, this character has been lagging a little bit behind. He's okay, especially if we talk about, you know, just playing in solo queue, being adaptable. There's a lot of great things about him, but when we compare him to many of the other tanks, he doesn't really have any strong strengths compared to them. Like, he's a jack of all trades, master of none, but the problem is he's just too weak at everything he does that he's worse in the head-to-head. Like, if you're trying to brawl, he's really not great at fighting any brawl characters. He's going to lose to Zarya's. He's going to lose to Queens. He's going to lose to Orisa's even. And if you're poking, he's going to be way worse than a character like Sigma. And yeah, like, the idea is that you force what you're not good at, but he's not quite strong enough objectively in the power level to make up the gap, make up the difference. So all in all, it would be better most of the time to just swap to the more optimal, better character rather than trying to make Ramattra work in every single situation. But, you know, we're one buff away for Ramattra being back to being super strong again. So I wouldn't sleep on him completely, and you could still play him, of course, but you can play whatever you want. But I think that right now he's just a little bit harder to get wins with than many of the other characters. Lifeweaver. I'm putting Lifeweaver in the D tier. This character is okay. Actually, this is not fair. I'm putting Lifeweaver in the C tier, okay? Now, Lifeweaver's main utility is the fact that he's really hard to kill, like incredibly hard to kill. Yes, you could reposition your teammates, which can be okay. I've talked ad nauseum about the fact that the pull is just worse a lot of times than abilities like Suzu or even Nade in a lot of cases. It can be okay sometimes and actually like more powerful than those sometimes, but it's very rare that it's not just a super huge tempo negative play. You can't really do anything yourself offensively. Your best impactful ability is your ultimate, using it to like be proactive in fights. But I think it's just a worse ultimate than many of the other support ultimates in the game. And yeah, I mean, you get a lot of value by just not dying. Like, you're really hard to kill. But I don't know why you would ever pick a character like Lifeweaver over a character like Moira. So as such, I'm putting him at the bottom of C tier. Illari, similar situation. At least you have a little bit more agency in your fights. I think some people are going to heavily disagree with me here, but I'm actually putting Illari at the bottom of B, not any higher. Yes, you can deal damage. Yes, you could get a lot of kills. Yes, you could rack up kills. But Python's really the only reason to play this character over many of the other supports. And I think with good positioning and expert play, you're going to get more value with the other supports. Illari doesn't have great mobility either, so you're kind of a sitting duck, similar to like Zen and Ana. What you're getting for it is not worth it. Like an Ana that is uncontested will literally carry a game with nanos, with sleeps, with nades. Zen's Discord is just so powerful uncontested. Illari can just output damage, and that's cool, but so can these other characters too. And you know, like, if you're smurfing a lobby, sure, Illari's gonna look busted, but most of the time the lack of mobility, what you're giving up to play Illari is not worth Illari. Like, it's not worth locking Illari. So yeah, I'm gonna put her in the B tier. Still could be fine in the right situations, but I think overall a little bit underpowered. We're also gonna do Mauga in the A tier. Solid character, solid pick overall. He's one of those characters that kind of occupy the same spot where he takes up space and pokes. He's similar to Orisa in that way. I know that they play fundamentally different, but oftentimes in a composition, they will fill the exact same role. They will do the exact same thing. Very, very similar things. So overall, yeah, I'm going to be putting him in the A tier. And then last up, I have Venture. You could argue that Venture is an A tier character. I am not, actually. I'm going to put Venture in the B tier. I think that Venture combats the meta in an interesting way, but doesn't really operate at a fast enough pace when you talk about some of these hyper-aggressive compositions. Characters like Pharah, characters like Tracer fit a lot better into those environments. You can still get a lot of value out of this character. I don't want to completely, like, I'm not shitting on this character or anything. Very, very great character. Just, not quite operating within the meta in a way that some of these other characters can, in my personal opinion. But this is my tier list right now for Season 11. Some of these are going to be a little controversial. I feel like people are going to talk to me about the Genji placement, the Hammond placement, the Illari placement, the Rein placement, the Lifeweaver placement. You know, maybe a lot of the A tier plays. I don't care because my list is objectively correct. No, I'm just kidding. If you have any disagreements, let me know in the comments down below. This is just my opinion from my view of the meta, but give me your comments, thoughts, and like, comment, and subscribe down below. And once again, thank you FlexiSpot for sponsoring this video. I'll see you later.